How is everybody? How is everybody? Ah, now I begin to believe it. It's nice to have you all here and to have a chance to share together. Be ye therefore perfect. Holy smokes. When you find a story that's illustrative and effective, you often want to tell it more than once. And so we're going to tell something that we've told before, but it's such a priceless insight. There was in India, there was a man who was sitting on the banks of a river, and he was just kind of watching the scenery around him, and there was a little Swami sitting farther down the bank near a tree in meditation. And he was just touched by the aura of peace and beauty and grace that surrounded this meditating Swami. And as he was watching, he happened to notice that next to Swami there was a scorpion who walked across and climbed up the nearby tree and walked out a branch and fell into the water. And the Swami broke his meditation, stood up, walked out into the water, picked up the scorpion, and walked back to the beach, waded back to the beach and put the scorpion down. In the midst of that, the scorpion stung him, and the poison of a scorpion can be quite strong. The Swami sat down and started meditating again. The scorpion went over to the tree, climbed up out the branch, and fell into the water. At which point, the Swami broke his meditation again, got up, went out into the water, picked up the scorpion, waded back to the beach, put the scorpion down, got stung again for his efforts, and the scene proceeded to repeat itself over and over and over. And each time, the scorpion would climb up the tree, drop in the water, get rescued, and sting the guy who rescued him. And the Swami would stand up, rescue the scorpion, despite the sting, sit back down. And finally, the man who was watching this couldn't bear it anymore. And he walked over to the Swami and he said, "Excuse me, sir." And the Swami looked up and he says, "Yes." And he says, "You keep going up, the scorpion keeps climbing that tree and he keeps falling in the water and you keep rescuing him. And, the scorpion just keeps doing it." And the Swami said, "Oh yes, that's just his nature." And he said, "But he stings you each time." He says, "Yes, that too is his nature." And then the man said, "But why do you keep rescuing him? Why do you keep doing it if that's what you keep getting?" And he said, "Because that's just my nature." We're told that love is something to aspire to. And there's nobody here who can tell me that they have too much love. We're told that peace is something that we should aspire to, and nobody can say that we have too much peace, certainly in this troubled world. But, yelling for peace is a silly thing. Getting agitated for peace is kind of counterproductive. But if we don't know other ways to work with energy, work with consciousness, what else is left to us? Being kind is important, being compassionate. But I would suggest, and the masters suggest, and Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda, has suggested that that's not enough. It's not enough to be kind. It's not enough to be loving. It's not enough to be considerate. It's not enough to be peaceful. Because those are actions that emanate from our ego, from our sense of separateness from life, from our own kind of individuated identity. And they're ergo conditioned upon our own capacity to engage in that practice at any given moment. And, there's the little image of, you get up in the morning, you've had a beautiful meditation, all is Ram, and you go and you get your cup of coffee and you're heading off to work and you got it in your hand and you're just driving along sipping your coffee, everything's just great, the sun's shining, and somebody cuts you off and you swerve and you spill the coffee in your lap. And, in fact, there's a cute story. There's a cute story of a woman who's driving along in her minivan. And she was driving along, and she all of a sudden is getting pulled over by the cops. And the cop pulls his gun, and he says, "Get out of the car, place your hands on the car." He handcuffs her, throws her into the back of the police cruiser, and drags her down to the police station. They lock her up. And, the woman's mortified and terrified, and about half an hour later, they let her out and they bring her in, and the arresting officer says, I am so sorry. I apologize, clearly I was in error. She said, what was this all about? He says, well, when I saw on your bumper sticker, when I saw you shaking your finger and flipping off this guy and yelling out your window, and he said, and then I saw on the bumper sticker, what would Jesus do? I thought the car must have been stolen. But it's possible. It is completely possible to know God. It's completely possible to discover the truth behind the illusions of this world. To discover that infinite love is not only real, but is the fabric of our own reality. That, as the Bible says, the peace that passeth understanding is not just something that some people can have as an experience, but is the truth of our own nature. That joy is the fabric of the universe. And that no matter what conditions confront us, those things, if we bathe ourselves in them, if we wake up, if we do the things that wake us up, we become indelibly joyful, indelibly loving, indelibly filled with a radiant peace. And that's not only our destiny, it's our heritage. It's from what we came. And it's always there. That's the story the Masters tell us. And that we will never, ever, ever be satisfied until we reclaim that as our one reality. I want to read a little bit for just a moment from a book of talks that were recorded and then transcribed. It's called Man's Eternal Quest. These are by Paramhansa Yogananda. And this particular talk is from Trinity Auditorium in Los Angeles, California, February 9th, 1934. It's called 3 Paths to Cosmic Consciousness. Okay, so again, the reason for cosmic consciousness is for our own sense of contentment. We will never be satisfied until we awaken into the awareness of our oneness with Spirit. We will never be satisfied. It's not somebody else won't be satisfied with us. We will never be satisfied with our own lives. Peace isn't something we make other people do. Peace is a condition of consciousness. So he says 3 paths to cosmic consciousness. There are 3 paths, basic ways to get there. So long as even a little tremor of thought and mental restlessness is present, you cannot reach cosmic consciousness. The technique, the Hong Sa technique of concentration, helps greatly to improve the quality and power of one's concentration. Its practice will save you, the earnest seeker, from years of fruitless wandering on the subconscious plane. That land you want to avoid is full of illusory and imaginative spiritual experiences. One must reach the superconscious state to have a real spiritual experience and realizations of truth. The world has a habit of much teaching and little practicing. You may hear a lecture on sugar 100 times, but you will not know its flavor until you have tasted it. Neither can the glory of any true teaching be known except by practice. You have to live the teachings of the prophets and the great ones. Then their truths become your own, and you realize the truth is demonstrable and universal. When you practice truth, whether you call yourself a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or a devotee of any religion, Christ will claim you, and so will Krishna, Buddha, and all the other divine incarnations of truth. Follow the path of truth steadfastly. Remember that out of thousands, only a few seek God, and out of those seekers, perhaps only one really knows Him. He went on to say then, on this path, the numbers are much better, the percentages are much better. He who is persistent will realize God, so try your best to make meditation a regular experience in your life. May you never forget God. May you never forget that joy, that love, that peace, and never be satisfied until you have Him completely. Be able to say, behind this finite frame, I feel the infinite. And then he talks about the first pathway to cosmic consciousness. Of the three ways to expand human consciousness into cosmic, the first is the social way, wherein you shut out self and live for all. Be loyal to your friends and feel love for everyone. God gave you a family that you might expand your consciousness by caring and doing for others. In family life, we learn love and self-sacrifice for our loved ones, and thus attain some expansion of consciousness. But this is not enough. Love that becomes personal is exclusive, confined. When love becomes impersonal, it expands. Develop impersonal love. Be able to give everyone the same love that you bestow on your family, and to do for others exactly as you would do for yourself. The social way to cosmic consciousness is to behave toward everyone in this way. The second way to cosmic consciousness is the way of self-discipline. Do not be a victim of immoderation. Enjoy things, but don't be attached to them. Be free. Be pleasant and self-controlled. Avoid becoming a slave to wrong habits and act only according to your righteous convictions. To attain cosmic consciousness, it is necessary to possess self-control and to rise above the dualities of heat and cold, pleasure and sorrow, health and sickness. Learn to endure all things without any excitement or disturbance of mind. He who is everywhere non-attached, neither joyously excited by encountering good nor disturbed by evil, has an established wisdom. Lastly is the way of meditation, the metaphysical path. If while meditating you are still conscious of the breath and you are tied to body awareness, to enter the cosmic consciousness, one must free himself from the bonds of the body through Guru-given meditation methods. If you put a sealed jar of water in a tank of water, that which is in the jar is separated from that which surrounds the jar. But if you remove the lid, the water in the jar and the water in the tank can mingle. Similarly, ordinary people shut out God because their consciousness is sealed in by the lid of ignorance. And when that lid is removed by right methods of meditation, one feels the peace of God inside and outside the body. And as you increase the length and depth of your meditations, you will find more and more peace and an ever new joy. Whatever else you may try, it will not produce the divine consciousness that comes from meditation. We're in a time, again, this is not the first time, but we're in a time of great testing. On a global scale, the earthquakes in Nepal are grabbing global attention. People are able to expand their sympathies, to embrace the pain and suffering and want and hardships that are being endured by the folks in that land. Locally, we have a very dear friend who lives up in Seattle community, and he went out for a walk about a week ago, right from the community, walking down the sidewalk. Car lost control, drove up over the curb and hit him, and gave him a very, very serious brain injury. And they weren't sure at all for the first 2 or 3 days that he was going to survive. He is, people have been praying for him all over the world. He is now, his condition has been reduced from critical to serious. He's beginning to respond. But it could conceivably be quite some time before he reclaims his mental faculties and his physical, the body-mind connection. And nobody even knows to what degree that will happen. And it was immediate. It just happened like that. Another friend, this is many years ago, but another friend was out for a run with a buddy, both of them on the path. And one of the guys, they were running together, and one of them said, "I don't feel so good." And he sat down, and 6 minutes later, he was dead. Probably an aneurysm or something. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know what's coming. We don't know what's happening tomorrow. A part of the responsibility that we have as ministers is to care for people and to try and anticipate the kinds of experiences that people might have, and to help create an environment that mitigates needless suffering. Okay? And the earthquake recently coincides with actually the inspiration that a couple of our ministry team had. They run the community, the Ananda community here in Portland, which was that, gosh, I wonder if an earthquake could happen here. And they dug in. Turns out that we've got a couple of really nifty tectonic plates just off the coast. And they anticipate, in fact, they know, as much as science can know, that the kind of earthquake that we are overdue for, is of the catastrophic kind, like in the 9 on the Richter scale category. And that we're likely to get a shake that'll last about 5 minutes. If you've ever been in an earthquake, that's like a really, really, really long time. They asked the question, if in fact that happens during our lifetime, which it's very likely to do. It could happen right this minute, could happen next week, could not happen for a couple hundred years, but it's likely, the time span is there. Would we be part of the problem or part of the solution? Are we doing the things that will allow us to help? Or will we just simply be a part of the great mass of people who end up being victims? They say of, I think they say of women, but they say of people that, you know, we're like tea. You know, our strength shows up when we get in hot water. And, you know, hot water comes to everybody. Everybody's going to face difficult times in their lives. If we do not prepare, the chance of us having the inner strength and the consciousness of wholeness that can sustain through any condition is not likely to be there. Like any muscle, it needs to be developed, it needs to be practiced. The easiest time to practice something is when it's easy to practice it. If you wait until really hard circumstances, the chances of the muscle being strong enough are not really likely. Meditation is that practice. And the practices of self-realization are those practices which give us a steadfast sense of ourselves in the midst of every condition. Now I'm going to go into, because we're celebrating the 4th anniversary of Ananda Center at Laurelwood, and it's a pioneering effort. We had a really fun, some friends of ours from many years, decades, they were founding members of Ananda Village. And we've done pilgrimages with them and stuff. Anyway, they just sent out a little picture of them back in 1976, I believe it was, 78. And so they looked a lot younger. And Vajra, who's also been a friend for those decades, he says, oh yes, that's during the time that they were living in the chicken coop behind the apprentice village. And I thought about it, and I thought about the founding of Ananda there, Ananda in Italy, Ananda community here, the Living Wisdom School here, Ananda Center at Laurelwood here, the Temple and Teaching Center here. And I realized in every single case, it's been a very unlikely event. In every single case, it's been people who had the courage, who believed that God could be found, and that it was important to create environments where that could be supported and the discovery expressed and reinforced. That people came together against all odds. We were talking about this just before service. It was actually very perfect for this service. We were talking about, oh yes, that was the time when snakes would come out of the drain, the shower drain down by the apprentice village. And there were outhouses and there were black widows everywhere. And one of the people in the room kind of went, ugh. No, thank you. But see, the trick is, the problem is, those are the very places. Think about, close your eyes for just a moment. Let's do something together. Close your eyes and think about any place where you go, ugh. No way, yuck. And those are the very places that you believe God doesn't exist. Those are the very places where you're stuck. And they're different for all of us. Everybody has their own little palette of limitation and thought. But if we don't go into those places and find the presence of God there, we will always have a limitation on our joy. We will never be joy. We will never be love. We will never be light. We will always be conditioned by those places of resistance and limitation. So you can open your eyes whenever you want to. But the goal of the spiritual path is to bring each one of us into the experience of God's presence under every condition. The nature of life is such that nobody will be spared from being presented with the very things you least want to be presented with. There's just no exception to it, and it's not bad news. It's not broken. Because the joy we seek, the love we seek, the wholeness we seek is beyond every sense of limitation, every condition. There are people in war-torn countries. Actually, this is personal. I've said this before, but I was in the '89 earthquake down in Palo Alto. And after I'd been trained as an EMT, and after we kind of settled our own community and got it stabilized. There are little miracles, by the way. Ananda was in a very small little pocket, and I think the only pocket on the peninsula that still had electricity. I don't know where it came from because there were no wires going anywhere else. We were in the middle of Mountain View in Palo Alto. But there it was, still lit up. But we went down to the Mountain View Triage Center. And I saw people with little crosses on. I just noticed it because, you know, it showed an affinity with spirit, that they loved God. And it mattered to them. But I saw people with little crosses on who had nothing wrong with them, that were absolutely so shocked and traumatized by the event of that earthquake that they were incapacitated. And I saw people who had been brutally beaten up by that same event, had broken bones, were bleeding and stuff, who were comforting others, were telling jokes, were blessing, were being a force for goodness. And then I saw the others too. I saw people who were badly hurt and suffering, and I saw people who were, okay, weren't hurt and were okay. But that contrast between those that were hurt, those that were really had every right to be traumatized and weren't, and those that had no reason to be traumatized and were, that distance between, and that's the difference of an inner life. That's the difference of contact with God. And the masters come to us and they say, I feel your yearning for wholeness. I feel your yearning for love and strength and power and a connection that is unbreakable no matter what comes. And I can help you find that. I can give you the tools and the experiences that will give you that indelible knowledge that joy is real, that love is real. No matter what, that wholeness and peace and calmness and your own nature go on because you're a part of spirit. They go on forever no matter what outward conditions. And then you find joy in the midst of everything. That's the gift of the path, and that's the gift that we as truth seekers, we who love and yearn for truth, can bring to this world. Think about in the midst of a disaster. Do you want to be around somebody who's crushed by the disaster, who's incapacitated, or do you want to be around people who are able to take that in and process it and still be radiant and buoyant and helpful of others? Which do you want to be? A personal moment, because we can't do this thing theoretically. There's plenty of people happy to talk and teach, very little practice. I had been practicing for about 20 years and was in the midst of, just normal day of work. And I ended up picking up a rattlesnake, not for stupid reasons. It was actually not the brightest thing I've done, but it was for good reasons. I was trying to move it, to relocate it, so it didn't bite somebody. You're not always successful at your efforts, but it was at least, I relate to the guy who goes out wading out into the water and picks up the scorpion. And reality changed instantly, and it was a life-threatening circumstance. And it was one of the most joyous events I've ever had in my life. It changed my consciousness, but it also did something more. It gave me a direct and personal experience that I am not this body. That my joy, my wholeness, my integrity, the power that courses through me is not limited to the circumstances. Have a body, don't have a body. It's an irrelevant question if you're in the presence of Spirit. If you're not, it's the only thing that matters, and hanging on to it is against the odds of what's going on. Make it terrifying and make it impossible. And the choice is simple. If you've practiced the presence of God when it's easy, you'll be able to practice it when it's difficult. If you haven't practiced it when it's easy, when the difficult things come, you won't know where to stand. It's just that simple. And that's what this talk is about. Be perfect. Be so composed of Spirit. Be so completely lost in Spirit that nothing can touch you. Not because you're walled off, but because life just flows through and all there is love and joy and wholeness. Every week in the Festival of Light, we say, lead me from sorrow to everlasting joy, from darkness to infinite light, from death to immortality. Those aren't just words. Those are real aspirations and real possibilities. But we have to have the courage. We have to have the courage. We have to be willing to find the courage inside to step into what life brings us. To say, I know that God can be found. I know that there's something more than this. And I will reach for it in the midst of today. I will stand up and embrace it. I will look for it. I will do the things that make it possible to experience God inside so that I can experience Him no matter what. And this is Yogananda. This is from Whispers from Eternity. We'll end with this. Be thou the general in my invasion of ignorance. You know, isn't it sweet? We ignore the presence of Spirit. Ignorance is to ignore. I bled, spreading thy name, and for thy name's sake I will ever bleed. With bloody limbs, broken body, wounded features, and bearing the thorn crown of derision, yet like a mighty warrior will I fight undismayed, even there where the skirmish is thickest. With the sword of calmness, I will stand firm against the hands of persecution. My disciplined armies of true aspiration, blowing trumpets in thy name, now march in triumph to seize the dark kingdom of God-denying souls. No matter how many blows I receive, and no matter how often the swords of persecution pierce my heart, I am content in the realization that thou knowest my craving to spread thy name. I will wear my tribulations not as scars, but as medals given for courage, and as inspirations to strive ever harder in my fight against ignorance. O Lord, help me conquer darkness with thy golden message of light. Be thou ever the general in my invasion of the continent of ignorance. Have a moment of silence and then we'll have some music.